Hey Kui, Nick Namalita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be talking about my book recommendations for Earth Day. I have tried to film this so many times today, and I keep getting interrupted either one way or another. So let's try to get through this. Earth Day is April 22nd here in the US. It's basically a day that was put into place to celebrate the Earth as well as to bring awareness to environmental issues. With that, I have some nonfiction book recommendations for you of books that I particularly have enjoyed, whether it's because they were educational to me, I felt like they connected with me in some way, I was just overall interested. I really like reading about the environment, plants, animals, etc. I will also have some links linked down below of environmental issues that I am currently aware of. Please look at them, as well as some Instagram pages that I particularly follow that I think do a good job in terms of bringing awareness. Save the Salmon is one of them. I know that there's a couple others, and I'm sorry, it's been a day. My first recommendation is going to be an author that I haven't recommended in a while, and I find that very disappointing that I haven't said her name in a while. The only two books I have read by her, I think there are the only two books that are that she has out right now, and that is Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding, Sweetgrass, as well as Gathering Moss. If I could only recommend one for you to read first, I would recommend Braiding Sweetgrass. This is the Milkweed Anniversary Edition. I absolutely love it. And basically, this is a book of indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the teaching of plants. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a botanist. She's also Potawatomi, which is an indigenous people in what is now known as the United States and Canada. I believe, I'm not entirely sure where the Potawatomi reside or what their ancestral land is. Basically, Robin Wall Kimmerer had questions as she was growing up through her culture, her family, her ancestors, and as she learned that she really wanted to go into botany, some of these questions that she had were being picked apart by the Western white Western scientists that basically said these were not scientific inquiries, and taught her the scientific method. And as she got her degree and started teaching herself, she realized that no, in fact, they are scientific questions, and how she thought of it was very scientific. Western science is just very white-centric and gatekeepy. So she talks about her experience, and here overall the message in this is very much we need to be in a reciprocal relationship with the earth, in terms of we can't just be this take and not expect that we are going to have a short amount of time on this earth, when really we need to be just as caring and just as loving to earth as she is to us, and that we cannot expect anything good to come from these exploitive constructs that capitalism has. So yeah, I absolutely love this. This came to me at a time where I needed it most, in terms of I needed comfort, but not in lies and fantasy. I needed it in terms of comfort in that, like, this is the way. And this is very much Robin Wall Kimmerer was very much like the friend who combed through my hair and told me how it was, and gave me that comfort that I could basically only find within my own culture. And yes, she is Potawatomi, I am Yurok. They are not the same. Indigenous tribes, peoples, and nations, rancherias are not the same with one another. We are not monolithic. We all have our individual perspectives, histories, lives, stories, but it's still really fun to find similarities in some of our teachings. And there is a comfort in finding them within each other, even if we're from different tribes or different peoples. So I particularly really enjoyed this. I would also encourage you to read it audibly. Robin Wall Kimmerer narrates her own works, and she is like a gem to listen to. I would also highly recommend Gathering Moss, which is another one. This is a lot shorter, and it can be a bit more science it is a bit more sciencey. So there was a little bits that kind of lost me, but I ultimately really love this. It is essentially about moss, the whole thing, as opposed to Braiding Sweetgrass, which was about a slew of environmental and plant issues. Gathering Moss is very much about moss and natural and cultural history of mosses, and it was really fun again to see the similarities in Potawatomi uses for moss, as well as to the local indigenous folks in my area. But it gave me appreciation of mosses. I've always loved moss to begin with, but this one after reading this, it gave me like a new light to look at them fondly with. As one of our first not responders, but one of the first to be affected by pollution, moss is one of the first to go. So to see so many mosses in my area, I just really like it. And of course, like, they're so spongy and just a purification of this area. So it gave me a new appreciation for some of the local mosses that we have locally, and just made me appreciate my local area a bit more. And it's also just nice to hear from an Indigenous voice when we've been silenced for so long. So anytime I can hype up another Indigenous voice, I'm really happy to do so. In the same vein, As Long as Grass Grows by Dinah Gilio Whitaker. This is the Indigenous fight for environmental justice from colonization to Standing Rock. This gives, I feel like this is a central theme for Earth Day, of just like Dinah Gilio Whitaker is an Indigenous journalist. She's Indigenous researcher and activist. Explores the fraught history of treaty violations, battles for food and water security, and protections of sacred sites, while highlighting the important leadership of Indigenous women in the centuries-long struggle. This can be a bit dense. I personally ended up listening to it and thought it was really well done. I don't think Dinah narrates it herself. I believe Kyla Garcia does, who's also another fantastic narrator, also Indigenous, I believe. But this book in particular, basically it is what it is. That's one thing I love about nonfiction, is that most of their subtitles, if not their titles themselves, give you what it's about. But this one in particular, Dinah definitely goes into environmental justice, particularly when it comes to environmental racism. There's a lot of aspects that she goes over, but some of the examples she goes over in particular that stands out in my mind was a beach that was trying to be protected here in California, not for the sake of the beach itself or the Indigenous people that utilize this beach for resources, but because of housing prices and white folks wanting to surf. So a lot of this kind of looks at the racism that environmentalism has had, in terms of like white people in particular, thinking that they know better how to protect the environment more than the original Indigenous caretakers. We can see this with state parks and as well as national parks. So yeah, it's just so, as well as some of the issues that had arose from Standing Rock, not just the Indigenous protesters that ended up protesting the pipeline, but also some of the white folks that infiltrated the protest to make it about themselves or fight against the cultural traditions of women wearing dresses or skirts. So even though it wasn't their protest to begin with. So Dinah goes into so much more than that. But those are a lot of the key elements that I had thought of. Sorry, I just remembered I forgot a book that I also want to talk about. So I also would highly suggest this. Another one that I would also highly suggest in the same vein is Fresh Banana Leaves by Jessica Hernandez. I want to make sure I got that right. I have the physical copy. I somehow missed it. It's not in here with me. Yes, by Jessica Hernandez. Healing Indigenous Landscapes Through Indigenous Science. Jessica Hernandez talks about particularly Fresh Banana Leaves, which is an not imported, but it was not a local plant in, I believe it was Central America or Mexico, but basically how it saved her dad's life, and how basically it's just there was just so much to this book. I really enjoyed it. This was another one that I read audibly and highly suggest, because it talks about the different colonizations, the different ways that the U.S. was colonized versus Mexico, and how how that affects how people view and how basically how indigenous folks from both places view colonization, and how they're classed differently. So like the U.S. was colonized by the English, and just based off how a lot of the U.S. was colonized by the English. We know that parts of it was colonized by the French, parts of it were colonized by the Spanish through Mexico, but basically how the whole of the U.S. treated indigenous folks were different than how the settler colonists of Mexico colonized indigenous folks there. And because of that, there's different systems. And here in the U.S. we have treaties, we have tribes, we have blood quantum, federally recognized tribes and blood quantum. But we think of it, there's a different system. Mexico never had treaties. They don't federally recognize tribes. It's only recently that they started talking about indigenous folks. So it's a different system completely, and it like kind of opened my eyes to that, because I never quite understood that, because we're not taught that, because U.S. school system, yay. So it gave that perspective, but also we get Jessica Hernandez's perspective in terms of going into the sciences, and how that she had gone into multiple sciences, like environmental science, marine biology, all these different sciences that Western science as a whole goes, no, those are completely different things. Why are you taking all of them? Those are completely different. And she's like, no, they're all connected. Quit compartmentalizing something that is a system that as a whole work together. We should be looking at all of it, not just focus on each individual thing, which I really enjoyed. I had the privilege of hearing Jessica Hernandez talk. Our Native American Studies program at the university I work at brought her to do an author talk, and I absolutely loved it and got my book signed. So I'm really hoping it better not freaking be lost. But I also highly suggest this book as well. It also gave me a different perspective in terms of invasive plant species, or plant species that are here now that weren't ever local, and the adaptation that they have for this environment, and the adaptation that we should have as people to incorporate them into daily lives. So she talks about that with like banana leaves, or the banana plant in Mexico, how they weren't a native plant species, but I mean, they incorporated them into their daily lives. So, and there's a couple of plants here locally that I see local folks doing that with as well. We have a blackberry plant that is called the Himalayan blackberry. It's not local. It's actually taking over to the point where we're losing our local blackberry plant. And really, it's the berry, if you compare them, the berries are bigger with bigger seeds, and it's juicier, but it's not as flavorful as the local blackberry. But people are still adapting to be able to use them similarly in terms of making blackberry tea out of the new shoots, etc. So it's really cool. But there is like this give and take with it, right? So speaking of food, the one that I'm always like, I don't know why I was surprised that I enjoyed it, but I really did. And that is Animal Vegetable Junk, A History of Food and From Sustainable to Suicidal by Mark Bittman. And this is essentially the history of farming and food. The story of humankind is usually told as one of technological innovation and economic influence, arrowheads and atomic bombs, settlers to stock markets. But behind it all, there is an even more fundamental driver: food. In Animal Vegetable Junk, trusted food authority Mark Bittman offers a panoramic view of how the frenzy for food has driven human history to some of its most catastrophic moments, from slavery and colonialism to famine and genocide, and to our current moment wherein big food exacerbates climate change, plunders our planet, and sickens its people. Even so, Bittman refuses to concede that the battle is lost, pointing to activists, workers, and governments around the world who are choosing well-being over corporate greed and gluttony and fighting to free society from big food's grip. I particularly really enjoyed this because Mark Bittman, like, went into all of the history. It wasn't just the white settler perspective. It was an indigenous history as well, how like corn made it from South America all the way up to North America, how that was, you can tell by the different types of corn trading, how we traded. It was also brought up in here how the land wasn't untouched when settlers came, and that it was like, it was cared for, that we took care, that indigenous folks took care of everything. It wasn't just untouched or unutilized. We knew how to incorporate how to take care of the land in order to take care of ourselves in a way that wasn't exploitive. So that I really appreciated, and the fact that the book and itself, like, despite going into this like doom and gloom of big corporations sickening people, exploiting our planet, and ultimately like driving climate change, he ended this book with some positive notes in what people were doing to help combat it. So I really appreciated that and like really enjoyed it. And it was just an interesting history, and the fact that it wasn't just a white-centric history was really nice. So it was like a breath of fresh air, and like this was another one that I listened to and immediately bought. So another interesting history book was Rain, A Natural and Cultural History by Cynthia Barnett. So I ultimately really like this one. My issue came from, at the beginning, she kind of made it seem that there was this tonality that I didn't like in terms of, you know, there are indigenous people who believe in the rain dance and do a rain dance to try to get rain to come. That there are beliefs outside of a norm, that a Western norm, that if you do something you can achieve rain. But she, like, there was a tonality that I can't tell if it was in the narrator who did the audiobook for this or if it was Cynthia Barnett herself, but there was a tonality of it that made it seem like, oh, look what they believe, how silly. It's just kind of like this, like, it put me in a mood before I even really got started with the book. But the book itself was really entertaining in terms of the history of and cultural history, the natural and cultural history of rain. I am still tired of the word deluge, whether it was because the narrator who read the audiobook was so, if it was just because that they enunciated or put a particular emphasis on the word, or just because Cynthia Barnett overused it. But so done with the word deluge. But the history itself was really interesting. I had no idea that the US still try, and like parts of the world, try to seed rain or rain clouds. I thought that was really interesting. So, and that the government spends so much money on it. It is the subject of countless poems and paintings, the top of the weather report, and the source of the world's water. Yet, this is the first book to tell the story of rain. Rain begins 4 billion years ago with the torrents that filled the oceans and weaves together science, the true shape of a raindrop, the mysteries of frog and fish rains, with the human story of our ambition to control rain, from ancient rain dances to attempts to blast rain out of the sky with mortars. Rain is also a travelogue, taking readers to Scotland to tell the surprising story of the Macintosh raincoat, and to India, where the villagers extract their scent of rain from the monsoon-drenched earth and turn it into perfume. Too much and not enough. Rain is shared experience and a unifying force in a fractured world. As climate change upends rainfall patterns and unleashes increasingly severe storms and drought, rain's history has much to tell us about coming together and adapt in stormy times. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was another one that I'm not that, like I said, I read audibly, but I'd be tempted to read it again physically, just because I don't know if it was a narrator issue. So some books that focus a bit more on animals, I would suggest Fox and I by Catherine Raven. This is an uncommon friendship. Basically, Catherine Raven is has gained her PhD and basically has a cottage in Montana, and she's very isolated. And at this cottage, she is constantly applying for real jobs to help her fit into society, but ultimately she does like nature walks and teaches at the Yosemite National Park. But at her cottage, as she's constantly working at it, as she's constantly working at it, she finds that there's a fox that comes to her doorstep every day at 4:15 p.m. And so she begins to cautiously like get closer and closer to this fox. She ends up sitting as close as she dare next to him and reading the little prints to him. And even though her scientific background has always warned her and told her not to not to put human emotion to animals, she realizes that he has a personality. I really enjoyed this. I thought this was really nice. It was I slowed down a bit. It was just kind of this like slow down and look at what's around you and observe, sit and listen. And it was just really nice. And it was like not just her realizing that this fox has its own personality, but that all the animals kind of do. And she kind of does that with all the animals that she encounters in her cottage. And it's, I don't know, it's just really pleasant. So another one I would highly recommend is World of Wonders in Praise of Fireflies, Whale Sharks, and Other Astonishments by Amy Nezukamatatil. This is a collection of short essays, and each one kind of like focuses on a specific plant or animal. A peacock, what was another one? The dragon fruit, whale shark. And basically each essay not only explores bits and pieces of that particular plant or animal, but also of Amy's life and how she connects it. But I know that with the peacock in particular, that short essay ended up sticking with me because it was about Amy when she was a child growing up in the US. I believe her family is from India, but she was told in a US school to draw an animal, and so she started drawing a peacock because they have a lot in their home in terms of like decorations. And her teacher ended up making a big fuss about how some students didn't understand the assignment in terms of they should be drawing an American animal. And so, I mean, understanding the hint, Amy ended up switching over her paper and drawing a bald eagle and ended up winning some contests. But it's like her heart wasn't in it, and she started questioning why they had so many peacocks in their home or whatever. But it was just like, oh my god, that is such an American school system thing. Really touching. It was really impactful, and the illustrations in this book in particular are really just adorable and well done. Another one is How to Be a Good Creature by Cy Montgomery, illustrated by Rebecca Green, a memoir in 13 animals. In a very similar vein, much like Amy Nazukamatatil, Cy Montgomery goes through animals that she has met in her life, whether it was just briefly or if it was a pet. She goes through these different animals in this short essay collection and how they made her be a better person. So there is an octopus, I think an ermine, a pig, a couple of dogs. It was another one that was just cute and just wonderful to explore, and how these animals have impacted her life. Cy Montgomery is an author that I absolutely love listening to. I would highly suggest reading anything by her if you're looking for a nonfiction that is more animal based than anything. Another one that I would recommend by her that I realized I didn't bring with me is The Soul of an Octopus, a surprising exploration into the wonder of consciousness and pursuit of the wild, solitary, predatory octopus. Popular naturalist Cy Montgomery has practiced true immersion journalism. From New England aquarium tanks to the reefs of French Polynesia and the Gulf of Mexico, she has befriended octopuses with strikingly different personalities: gentle Athena, assertive Octavia, curious Kali, and joyful Karma. Each creature shows her cleverness in a myriad of ways, escaping enclosures like an orangutan, jetting water to bounce balls, and endlessly tricking companions with multiple slate of hands to get food. So yeah, highly suggested. Those are my recommendations for Earth Day. I hope that you get some sort of inspiration to read or to go explore. If you've read any of these, please let me know your thoughts down in the comments down below. I'd love to hear them. Otherwise, if you made it this far, thank you so much for dealing with this. Let's put an earth emoji. It makes sense. Otherwise, be sure to like this video, subscribe if you want to see more of me, and I hope to see you in another video very soon. Chew.